What's up, folks? Welcome back to TacticalTortoise. My name is Trevi, and today I've got a little bit of a different video topic for you. This isn't an April Fool's joke, I swear. We're going to be ranking all of the different loadouts of Primaris Lieutenant. I was building a Space Marine list a couple weeks ago, and I noticed that there's a lot of options for Primaris Lieutenant, and it's sort of up in the air which one is the best. There's a lot of pros and cons to each individual loadout, and I thought it would be a fun topic to just go through all of them and talk about which ones I think are good. So, if you like this style of video and you like this subject material, go ahead and drop a like on the video, drop a subscribe down below. I really appreciate it, and it helps out a lot. Now, before we get into it, I want to talk about a couple preliminary pieces of information. The first one is the role of a Primaris Lieutenant in a Space Marine army. Now, obviously, all lieutenants come with that tactical precision aura, which gives reroll 1s to wound for core units within 6 inches of them. Now, unfortunately, unlike a captain, they don't come built in with an invulnerable save, which means that they tend to not survive very well on the front line. In addition, they don't have access to some of the really premier melee weapons that the captain versions of the character would, meaning that they tend to take a more backline role. This makes them a good aura caddy for things like your Rites of War auras, and it also means that they more heavily prioritize ranged attacks over melee attacks, given that they're almost always in a position to make use of a ranged attack, but they're often punished for committing in with those melee attacks. That said, while they're not your premier melee character, and typically you can't really build them to be a solid smash character, on the flip side, it is nice to have a decent melee attack that you can use to follow up in the late game if you need them to solve some problems after enemies come in and start to engage the models that the lieutenant is supporting. The particular attributes that we're going to be ranking in this video are the character's cost. That's a big deal, especially since Primaris Lieutenant isn't a focal point character of your army. It's not like a Smash Captain where you'll spare no expense to make that guy survivable and make him deal additional damage. You want to be spending oftentimes as little as possible to get an efficient Lieutenant profile into your army. We also want to take a look at whether or not they have appropriate war gear for the role they're trying to fill. Generally speaking, that means that they're going to have a decent ranged attack, but having good melee to back it up also helps, and the ability to upgrade those particular pieces of war gear, especially with relics, is a big deal also. If you don't have a relic that's already baked into your Primaris Lieutenant build, sometimes, people are taking the Vox of Spiritum or something on them. That's a big benefit of taking the Primaris version rather than a standard Lieutenant who can take a jump pack, which is nice. Having the option to take a powerful relic gun or something on that model can be pretty useful. And lastly, we're going to look at any extra abilities or extra attributes that model brings to your army. So with that, let's get into it and let's talk about all of the Primaris Lieutenants and which one is the best. So in this video, I'm going to be covering 8 loadouts. There are a couple more that you could potentially put together, but these 8 are the most relevant of them. So, getting into it with number 8, the Lieutenant with Power Sword. It's a little too bad for this iconic model because when you think of a Primaris Lieutenant, this is probably the one that you picture in your head. But unfortunately, only being armed with a bolt pistol alongside that power sword means that he's not doing anything to speak of in the shooting phase, which is not good for a unit that's mostly going to be hanging around the back of your army. In addition, a mastercrafted power sword, while it is a nice option, it's not a particularly exciting piece of war gear, and not one that you really want to hang your hat on. Moving up to number 7, let's talk about the Primaris Lieutenant with Stalker Bolt Rifle. Now, the Mastercrafted Stalker Bolt Rifle is certainly nothing to sniff at. It is a one-shot gun, but coming in at that big ol' 3 damage is pretty cool, especially on a 2+ ballistic skill platform. A pretty nice upgrade on the Lieutenant profile from their 8th edition entry. The downside is that Primaris Lieutenants are often moving around the table, especially to get their aura where you need it most, especially if you're bringing combined arms units like Dreadnoughts or Intercessors that you want to be buffing with that guy. And that means that most of the time he's going to be -1 to hit, meaning a single shot weapon only hitting on a 3 is a little bit less consistent than you're looking for. Now, a couple things that you can do with this guy, which is pretty relevant, is upgrade that bolt rifle to a slightly more exciting version. For example, you can take Lament, which, in addition to making the weapon a base strength 5, also effectively adds 1 to its damage characteristic, dealing an additional mortal wound every time it wounds successfully. The big downside is that it can't shoot characters. I don't know why this particular sniper rifle doesn't have the ability to shoot characters, but threatening to put 4 damage directly through on a 4-wound character would be pretty scary. That said, dealing 3 mortal wounds is pretty nice, and having a 3 damage strength 5 attack on top of that is good to talk about as well. The other thing that I want to cover is Ex Tenebris out of the Raven Guard chapter relics. This turns your 1-shot Stalker Bolt Rifle into a 3-shot, effectively auto bolt rifle with extra steps. You can ignore Lookout Sir, so you can still target characters. You get +1 to hit, and it is an assault weapon, which means that you can advance and still fire at your 2+ ballistic skill, or shoot through dense cover and fire at your 2+ ballistic skill. And on top of that, you ignore cover that adds to the saving throw, which means that at its AP of 2, this thing is punching through a lot of armor saves. And at 3 shots with 2 damage with a high AP value, it's actually a force to be reckoned with. Moving up to number 6, this is going to be the first of the chapter-specific variants, the Dark Angel's Primaris Lieutenant, who has the option to upgrade their bolt pistol to a plasma pistol for an additional 5 points. While most of the time this is going to be totally superfluous because you would be upgrading your bolt pistol to a plasma pistol, but then using that alongside a more powerful ranged attack. For example, if you take the Mastercrafted Stalker Bolt Rifle build we just talked about and also gave that guy a plasma pistol, he would rarely shoot the plasma pistol over taking that shot with the 3 damage Stalker Bolt Rifle. That said, I do think the version with the Power Sword does benefit a lot from having access to that plasma pistol because it does give them something to do in the shooting phase. At least shooting a non-overcharged strength 7 gunshot is pretty fine, and if you really need the extra 2 damage shot in there as well, you could overcharge it with the chance of blowing yourself up. That is a good complement to the Power Sword. Whether or not it makes that version particularly viable, I'm not sure it does, and that's why it's going to be sticking down here at number 6. It is a cool model, though, especially with that Dark Angel's helmet with the little sword on it. I like that. Moving on to number 5, we're going to be starting to talk about some of the more specialized versions. This is the Lieutenant in Phobos armor. This guy is 5 points over the cost of a normal Primaris Lieutenant and comes with a mastercrafted Oculus Bolt Carbine alongside paired combat blades and a grav shoot, giving him the Death from Above ability. The Oculus Bolt Carbine is a decent weapon. It is a rapid fire weapon, meaning that if he is moving around a lot, he's often only going to be getting 1 shot out of it, which isn't exactly what you want. However, the paired combat blades do give him a little bit of extra punch in melee, which is nice. And having the option to deep strike in with the grav shoot means that in some weird lists where you're relying heavily on damage output coming in and out of outflank or coming in out of deep strike, this guy gets to come in alongside those units for no additional cost. The Phobos keyword is also a really big deal. It gives you access to the Guerrilla Tactics stratagem, which allows this model to pick himself up off the table as long as he's not within 6 inches of any enemy models and come in off a table edge later on in the game. This means that these Phobos lieutenants have a lot of flexibility. You can use them in a variety of ways. They can just run over and grab engage in all fronts or a specific secondary if you need it. And especially if they're running as your Rites of War caddy, getting the ability to pop a Primaris Lieutenant to the other side of the table and get objective secured on an objective that your opponent didn't expect is actually pretty nice. I do like the Phobos keyword on these guys, but I don't think that the Phobos Lieutenant is quite as effective at applying it as the next entry that we'll talk about. Now, a couple other benefits to this profile are, in addition to that Phobos keyword unlocking those stratagems, it also unlocks you the Vanguard Warlord traits, and there are a couple really interesting combos you can use with that. Previously, I talked about Ex Tenebris when we were talking about the Stalker Bolt Rifle build, and you can upgrade your Oculus Bolt Carbine to that weapon. In addition, you can upgrade him with a Warlord trait like Shoot and Fade, which allows a Phobos unit within 6 inches essentially to fire and fade after it shoots, and you can use that with this character. So without even having to have any other Vanguard units in your army, you can have this guy run around a corner, shoot Ex Tenebris, and then run away, which is, I think, pretty sweet. You can use that Shoot and Fade on a unit of Eliminators or something similar. Or if you need to, you can add another support ability to him like Target Priority that can give one of those Phobos units an additional +1 to hit. The Phobos keyword and having a pretty reasonable weapon to upgrade to a relic means that this guy does have a lot of flexibility in his builds, even though I'm not sure that they're their most efficient. They certainly are fun. Another really interesting combination for these Vanguard Warlord traits might be in the Deathwatch chapter, which can take larger units of Eliminators thanks to their their Spectrus kill team loadouts. For example, you can take that Spectrus kill team with 5 infiltrators, then fill the rest of it out with 5 eliminators, and they make very good use of those Vanguard Warlord traits. This isn't a particular synergy if you're already taking a lieutenant in your army and don't have that Warlord trait slot filled up. It might be an interesting direction to go in if you're looking for a little bit of extra flexibility. Moving down to number 4, this might be a little bit of a controversial pick because I think a lot of people would put this guy even higher, but we're going to remain on the Phobos train and talk about the Lieutenant in Reaver armor. This guy comes with a special issue bolt pistol as well as a combat knife, giving him an additional attack, and the Terror Troop rule, which reduces enemy leadership while they're near him. While this lieutenant loadout's weapons are nothing to write home about, an extra attack is nice, especially once you get this guy stuck in under the Assault Doctrine. Having 6 attacks on the charge with AP1 is pretty good. If you're in a chapter like White Scars or Blood Angels, that actually deals a reasonable amount of damage. His special issue bolt pistol, it's AP2 and 2 damage, which is nice to have, but the short range and only 1 shot is not very exciting. That said, the Reaver keyword actually comes into play here, giving you access to the Terror Troops stratagem without having to take an actual unit of Primaris Reavers, which are, generally speaking, not very good. That means this model could remove objective secured from enemies within 3 inches and potentially stop actions from happening. The downside is you have to use it proactively. You have to use it during your command phase, meaning essentially in order to protect an objective, you use it defensively, and your opponent is just not allowed to come in with objective secured units for that turn, making it less useful than you would think in a lot of situations. That said, for the low price of having slightly suboptimal war gear, it is a pretty nice benefit to have, especially since this is one of the cheaper lieutenant options, costing no additional points over the cost of a normal lieutenant, and coming with all of these built-in abilities. It is important to note that both of these Phobos lieutenants come with the smokescreen keyword, making them a little bit more difficult to kill, so even lacking an invulnerable save, they can be resilient to ranged attacks. And the Reaver lieutenant comes with the shock grenades keyword, which gives him access to the shock grenade stratagem, which can allow him to ignore Overwatch. This is pretty useful, especially if you're looking down some powerful Overwatch and you want to turn it off before your melee units get stuck in. The Lieutenant in Reaver armor is highly rated, not because he deals a lot of damage or is particularly efficient, but because the immense amount of utility those keywords give you is pretty important. With that, let's move on to our top 3 and start with the Standard Lieutenant with Auto Bolt Rifle. This is, I think, one of my favorite loadouts because, costing no extra points over the standard cost of the profile, the Auto Bolt Rifle Lieutenant comes with one of the best infantry firearms in the game. A mastercrafted auto bolt rifle that fires 3 shots at 2 damage apiece. They are AP0, but being an assault weapon, it does benefit from Tactical Doctrine, meaning turns 2 and 3, the turns that you're going to be most often using this weapon, it is going to be AP1. And being a 24-inch range and being able to get the full effectiveness of that ranged attack out to 24 inches means you're going to be firing it every turn. And while a single mastercrafted auto bolt rifle in your army isn't the most exciting thing in the world, being able to fire it 4 or 5 turns out of the game means that the damage from it is going to pile up, especially when you consider upgrading it to something like the Bellicose bolt rifle, which adds 1 to its strength and AP, as well as adding an additional shot to it. Seriously, if you can't think of another lieutenant profile to go with, I don't think you can go wrong with the auto bolt rifle lieutenant. He just has such a good gun for no extra points. It's so solid. Number 2, let's talk about something totally off the wall here. This is the Indomitus Primaris Lieutenant, who comes with a Neo-Volkite pistol, mastercrafted power sword, and storm shield. The reasons that this model are good are basically totally different from every other entry we've talked about today. He is the most expensive lieutenant profile, coming in at 90 points, and the most melee-oriented. That said, if you're looking for a lieutenant profile to make into a Smash character, outside of taking a standard lieutenant with a jump pack and a particularly efficient combination of weapons and warlord traits, this guy is the way to go. He has a resilient profile with that storm shield coming in at a 4+ invulnerable save and a 2+ armor save, as well as a good baseline weapon profile to upgrade with that mastercrafted power sword. Unlike the standard power sword lieutenant, he is not that worried about getting stuck in, given that he basically has a standard captain defensive profile. If this guy is your aura caddy, I like adding the armor Indomitus to him to give him 6 wounds and the ability to get a 3+ invulnerable save once per game, or you can just stack a bunch of offensive abilities abilities on him, maybe giving him the Burning Blade and Imperium Sword to deal a bunch of damage in melee. This profile is super badass, and while I don't think he's good for every list, if you have those extra 15 points to upgrade him, I do think that he is very solid. Even with a solid defensive and melee profile, the Indomitus Lieutenant actually doesn't shoot that badly either. With a 2-shot pistol weapon at 15-inch range, meaning you do get to use it more often than not, especially since this guy's going to be up close and personal with his opponent. Coming in at Strength 5, no AP for 2 damage, and the Volkite ability to deal mortal wounds on unmodified wound rolls of 6. As soon as you switch into Assault Doctrine, this thing becomes AP 1 and actually is a little bit of a threat. I really like this guy, the biggest downside being that 15-point price tag, but if you have it available in your list, I would almost always take the Indomitus Lieutenant. That said, a happy medium between a standard Lieutenant profile and this powerful Indomitus Lieutenant is our #1 pick for Primaris Lieutenants today. This is the Space Wolves Primaris Lieutenant, who comes stock with a master-crafted bolt carbine and power axe. This guy encapsulates all of the things we've been talking about this video and rolls them up into one relatively efficient profile very nicely. Biggest downside is that you do have to play Space Wolves to play him, although as one of the most effective Space Marine chapters, I do think that that's not that big of a downside, actually. We talked about how good the auto bolt rifle is, and this guy has essentially the same thing, coming in an Assault 2 weapon at 2 flat damage rather than 3 shots, but backing it up with a really solid melee profile. A Mastercrafted Power Axe is one of the most perfect melee profiles to be able to take. Coming in at Strength 6, meaning you're wounding all of those Toughness 3 guys on 2s and most other targets on 3s. AP 2, which is a good AP value to knock up against most invulnerable saves without being inefficient, and 2 flat damage, which is a solid profile to bring in when he's charging in with his 5 attacks. Like I said at the top, I don't think you should always be prioritizing the melee profile on your lieutenants, but having it to back up a solid range profile is really good, and especially for a chapter like Space Wolves that wants to start the game by shooting at its opponent before moving into melee in the mid to late game, that's exactly what this profile is designed to do and fits into that game plan perfectly. Alongside the fact that unlike the Indomitus Lieutenant, the Space Wolves Lieutenant is only 5 extra points over the base cost, coming in at 80 points with that Mastercrafted Power Axe, he's just a really solid profile, and you don't really pay a premium for him. If you don't have a specific plan with another Lieutenant profile in a Space Wolves list, I would 100% take this guy every time. He's so solid, he's good in multiple phases, and you don't really spend that many points on it. The flexibility alone is incredibly impressive. And that's it. That's all the Primaris Lieutenant loadouts we talked about. Let me know what you think about these lieutenants down in the comments. I think I had some spicy picks in here, so I'd be interested to hear what people thought and whether or not you agree with me on these lieutenant varieties. I know my Primaris Lieutenants having so many different models available to them is kind of a meme, but it's a meme I'm okay with leaning into. Thanks for watching all the way to the end of the video. Big thanks to my supporters over at patreon.com/TacticalTortoise, as well as the YouTube channel members and Twitch subscribers. All those people are phenomenal, and I love them. And also, I love everybody who watched to this point in the video. Remember to keep it classy, folks, and have happy wargaming.